It's summertime, and you know what that means. More time to play games and more games that you can play. We're going to talk about all of it today on Crossfire's episode of Crossfire Faith and Gaming, the podcast. What's up? This is David Petty, the Reverend David Petty, as sometimes Russ calls me, one of your hosts for Crossfire Faith and Gaming, the podcast. I'm joined by this guy up over here in the Colorado hat.
How's it going, Dave?
That's Russ. That's Russ Dornish. I'll introduce him. Russ is in Montana. He's a PlayStation guy, plays lots of games, and he's going to tell you all about all that later. And then up over here, we've got Brian.
Hey, everybody. Good to be back.
So yeah, I am way behind on all of the announcements. So I am not going to be the person to talk about the announcements. I'm going to let probably Russ take it from here, because Russ, you're probably way more into all of it, and Brian, you're probably way more up on the Xbox stuff on your side. I'll come in later and talk about hardware. What do you got for us today, Russ?
So we already discussed a little bit about the PlayStation event on Crossfire News 2 weeks ago. However, with that being said, the event, the showcase was okay. I didn't review it very well. I think there was a lot of stuff left off the table, but it's kind of interesting that in the last year or so, I think that Microsoft and PlayStation have kind of switched roles. You know, PlayStation was always that company that would prefer hype over like immediate releases, and so they would announce things 3-4 years, and it would take a long time for things to come out. They have since been changing that kind of how things work, just because the narrative has always been a delay station is the meme for it, because of all the games that constantly get delayed on PlayStation. So they're like, we're not going to announce anything until like we really for sure know dates and releases and things like that. So because of that, I think that's why we got a little bit of a less, hyped showcase, because it's been 2 years since we had a showcase, by the way. Some of the highlights, though, of course, were Metal Gear Solid has been rumored to be remade, and they are going to go with the prequel, which is actually Metal Gear Solid 3. Metal Gear Solid 3 is technically a prequel in the series for Solid Snake, so that game is being remade. They had a cool little teaser trailer to kind of show that, with what looks to be like it's going to be released in 2024. On top of that, just a couple, I'm just going to throw them out there, and then we can chat about them and discuss what we thought about them, if there was anything that really caught our fancy. But with that, we have Alan Wake 2, of course, being shown surprisingly at a PlayStation event. Tower of Fantasy, Sword of the Sea, a big one that people are very excited for, Helldivers 2. If you're a Helldivers 1 fan, that had quite the fan following, so that was an excited thing. Some Assassin's Creed Mirage, of course, Final Fantasy 16 with it coming out in 2 weeks was shown off. And then just real quick, a little bit of hardware stuff. You had the Project Q, which is a remote play only device for PlayStation, and then the new Sony earbuds as well to kind of round out the highlights. Of course, there were plenty of other games that were shown off. And of course, the final reveal, which was the biggest, the gameplay reveal for Spider-Man 2 coming out this fall, which, to jump ahead real quick, just because it's a PlayStation thing, they did reveal that Spider-Man 2 will be released October 20th this year. That was announced actually at the Summer Games Fest with Jeff Keighley. They didn't show any more gameplay. They just released the release date. So that's what that looks like. But yeah, guys, your thoughts, or any of the games in particular from the Sony event that kind of caught your fancy on the list of games that we have here?
Brian, why don't you go first?
Yeah, Alan Wake 2 jumped out at me. I watched the entire game in a kind of a long play, let's play format. I really loved the narrative of that game. I thought it had some things, gameplay wise, that could have used improvement in terms of the way that combat worked, and it looked like maybe they've addressed some of those things in Alan Wake 2. They brought in some more like creatures, monsters, and things going on. They split the narrative, so they have this kind of FBI agent angle going. It all just looks really interesting. It sounds like it has a little bit more of a horror bent than the original, but man, it just looks really intriguing. So I'm definitely interested in what's going on with Alan Wake 2 for sure.
Yeah, the one that stood out for me, well, really a few stood out for me. Alan Wake looked beautiful. And especially it kind of in that creepy pseudo horror, but not like, it's not Resident Evil horror, a little bit more like Last of Us, more story, but just looked like a beautiful game. Tower of Fantasy was one that stuck out to me as just very intriguing. Like I couldn't even define it. It was like, okay, this looks like, I don't know, like Legend of Zelda meets like something else meets something else. I don't know, but it looked intriguing. Sword of the Sea, I think it looks like to me. Do you guys ever play those mobile games, Astros? What is it? Odyssey and Discovery. I don't even remember what it was called. Anyway, they were great, beautiful games, and it looked like that, but in 3D. And I just love the developers there, so I'm curious to see that. My daughter was very excited to see Cat Quest. My son was excited to see Teardown. Both of those are games that they've played on other devices, so excited to see those come to PlayStation. For me, I'm intrigued by the Project Q, but I don't know that I would say I'm interested, especially depending on price point.
Yeah, I definitely think the Project Q, the problems that we're kind of dealing with and the backlash people are facing, it would have helped Sony had they been able to announce like the release date and price for it before they, did anything else with it. I think that's going to be kind of a problem because I have a feeling, again, just knowing Sony and just kind of where they're at with this stuff, that they're going to probably price it at like $250, $300. And at that point, if that's the case, it's going to flop hard because everybody has a cell phone and it's cheaper to just buy a $75 backbone for your cell phone and make it that remote play device that, has the same capability that the Q is going to have. So not really sure as far as that goes. Like I said, I think for the most part, there wasn't any huge announcement games. And so that's kind of where we're at and kind of how the Sony event didn't really meet expectations or do what it needed. So, Brian, let's go ahead and move on to the Xbox game showcase, which I think did quite a good job for what it was. So let's hear about that.
Yeah, I thought the Xbox showcase was pretty excellent. You mentioned at the top that it was kind of a reversal here where Xbox has gone to announcing a lot of things without like definitive dates, where before they kind of concentrated on things that were coming in the very near time frame, which is kind of what PlayStation used to do. So I thought that was just kind of intriguing. Like you mentioned, it was just almost a total reversal. But we saw a number of interesting things. I guess we can kind of go in the same way that you did. We'll kind of, I'll run through the show here, the list of show, and then we'll touch on the items that we have, more to say about. But I'm not necessarily in the show run order, but they announced something called South of Midnight, which was some kind of game. We just got kind of a cinematic trailer for that. Set in some sort of a bayou, looked really interesting. Clockwork Revolution, which is an In Exile project. Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Cities Skylines 2. Star Wars Outlaws. Of course, Starfield, we got an extended look for that. Fable, which I think led off the show. Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Avowed, which is an Obsidian project. That's a first-person fantasy RPG. Some more details on Forza Motorsport. Towerborn, which is a Banner Saga devs. It's made by them. 33 Immortals, which was this weird co-op game for 33 players. Dungeons of Hinterberg, which was like European Alps, like adventure game. I don't know. Jusant, I think that's how you pronounce that. It was a climbing game. There was a trailer for Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. Okay, here's one I'm going to pronounce wrong. Kinitsugami, I think. Path of the Goddess, which had some wild Japanese aesthetics. Payday 3 they announced. And then the Persona group, I would call it, Metaphor ReFantasio, which is a Persona fantasy RPG, then Persona 3 Reload, and Persona 5 Tactica, which I assume is a tactics game, Persona. And then Still Wakes the Deep, which is developed by the Chinese Room. It's a horror game set on an oil derrick. So yeah, what jumped out at you guys? What do you want to talk about?
Well, in watching, obviously, leading off with Fable looks really good. It's in engine. We didn't get to really see like a deep dive of like, a full gameplay section. So I'm interested to see. Everything I hear about the game is really good because it's saying it's going back to the Fable roots. So I'm excited about that to see kind of what that game is going to be like. Clockwork Revolution was probably my most excited game that I saw out of any of the events that we've seen thus far this summer. Very much a BioShock Infinite kind of feel to it. Same kind of aesthetic, first person shooter. Yeah. So super excited for that. And then Star Wars Outlaws. The nice thing with that one is we got to see the trailer and I was like, wow, this game looks really good. And then today, as we are recording this on June 12th, Ubisoft had their event and they actually showed like a 5-minute gameplay scene from it, which included some pretty cool. It kind of gave me Uncharted vibes because it's a third person. It looks like shooter because you actually use guns. And then the coolest part of the game, which they surprised us with, was you get in your spaceship, you fly out of the planet, and it immediately goes into gun combat with your spaceship out in space, to jumping to light speed, to going to a new planet, to finishing off your quest. So much there that I was like, okay, this is really, really good. This is really good stuff. So I'm excited for that. And then, of course, we had the Starfield announcement. I'm liking what I see. I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried, mostly because people don't want to say this, but let's be honest. Bethesda has not had a good track record in the last 10 years. So that's kind of worrisome that it's such a massive idea and game, and we've seen this before with space games, and so I'm a little worried. I'm going to be interested to see the reviews. The good news is it's coming to Game Pass, so we don't have to pre-order it if we don't want to. We can wait. We can play it on Game Pass, which a majority of these games, by the way, are coming on Game Pass. They did announce that during the event. The last little comment that I'll make, it's kind of what you talked about, Brian, is Xbox now making that change about announcing games in the future. Almost every game announced at the event was given a 2024 date without an actual 2024 release date telling us the exact date. So that worries me because of Xbox's recent track record with not hitting those release windows. And so far it looks like Starfield will be the biggest and only big release for Xbox this year for 2023, which is pretty sad. They'll have gone 3 years almost with one, big exclusive release that's considered that top tier. I know Hi-Fi Rush released. I know that these other games released, but we're talking about those really, really big hitters that you get every year from the company. So, David, what are your thoughts on some of those? I know there were a couple games that you were really interested and excited for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly fascinated to go back and watch all of it because I didn't catch most of these games. I just saw that they were that these are the things that got announced. I've been on vacation for a couple of weeks, so I'm way behind the times. But I think it's fascinating to look at some of these and wonder, especially some of the updates or the expansions, and wonder, okay, is this new content? Is this more of the same? I had to go and look for a second at Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. I was like, okay, like any game, especially sports titles are notorious for this, right? Like, oh yeah, we just updated a new thing. We put a new year on it and now, it's new. But it does look like at least that there's a lot of new content there. As far as actual games that I'm really excited for in this list, I would say Starfield, like you guys were talking about, I've been interested in it since I saw the initial announcement at E3 2016 or 17. And they just had this like, this space and like this thing opens up and then there was like Starfield. You're like, what is that? So I'm just intrigued more so to like learn more about it. I don't know if it's actually going to flop or if it's going to be successful, but should be good. I still need to go back and play the first Sinuous Sacrifice. I think it's an amazing approach to games to say, what if games could teach us about our mental health, right? Isn't that amazing? I'm trying to think. There was one other. Oh yeah, City Skylines, which I have always loved city builder games, and really, in my view, and I think in a lot of people's view, there has not been a perfect city builder game since SimCity 4. SimCity 4 was kind of the pinnacle of sim city builders, and then City Skylines was good, and the new SimCity was okay. So City Skylines looks like maybe with the level of detail that they're going for and just the graphics engine behind it should be absolutely phenomenal. But I'm also, I'm prepping myself to get let down because nothing's perfect. Of course, the Star Wars Outlaws looks amazing. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I wanted to say some more details in terms of Flight Simulator 2024. I love the addition of the missions that you can do now. That is really intriguing. Search and rescue, and a bunch of other different scenarios, firefighting, all kinds of different
VIP
things
transport.
that you can do. Yeah,
or there was one that was like
helicopters and stuff.
Like taking a helicopter. It almost reminded me of like those old. Did you ever play Simcopter back in the day? The like helicopter missions of like you got to take this offshore container onto a container platform. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, to me, it opens up a whole new avenue for the game to explore.
Right.
That beyond being just beautiful and being able to fly around and look at stuff, to be able to actually do some of these missions looks. I mean, I might actually play it this time. So.
And that was some of my favorite moments. Was actually some of the not Top Gear, totally different franchise. Top Gun, the Top Gun content they put in for Flight Simulator, where you could go on the missions, and you had to do this, and then you have to do this. Almost more campaign focused than the traditional Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's like, the campaign is learn to fly. So this will be interesting. Be an interesting update, and be interesting to see what it costs. I was a little disappointed with the first Flight Simulator, the new 2020 Flight Simulator, because all of the extra stuff that was like, oh, you want a detailed airport? Great. It's just going to cost you another $70 for the airports package. It's a little bit disappointing. So,
and we should mention the one more thing from that conference, which they said was the extended look at Starfield, but actually was the new version of the Xbox Series S, which is black and has a 1 terabyte hard drive. And I guess I'll start off with my thoughts in that I think the 1 terabyte hard drive is what it should have had in the first place, given that it has no disk drive and is pretty much a Game Pass machine. So it fills up really fast. I think this is double the storage of the original one. So good, but probably should have been that way in the first place.
It wasn't the original one like 480, something like that? Like not even a full 500?
Well, technically both consoles did that, because a lot of it was the OS and operating system and all that. So, okay, well, let's jump to Summer Games Fest. Not a ton here, like there has been in the past. The biggest announcement, which some people said was a letdown, I was happy with it because of the status for it. But Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the remake Part 2 was revealed, and it was revealed about this. It is going to be on 2 discs. That is right. It is going to be on 2 Ultra HD 4K discs, which for those at home, the biggest Ultra HD 4K disc you can get is 100 gigabytes. So they're putting two of those in there, which is just weird because recently what we've seen with games is like the game is not on the disc at all and it just initiates an online download for like 150 gigs. So I get what they're doing here and they're trying to make this a marketing thing, but in essence it really isn't that big of a difference from what we're seeing right now with other games. So, you know, just an FYI on that, it's something we've seen before. So needless to say, yeah, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm excited. I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I'm very much looking forward to the next one. Of course, like I said, Spider-Man 2 got the release date. Prince of Persia Metrovania game, 2D version is coming, so we get new Prince of Persia. Sonic Superstars, which is like a 3D version of the original Sonic, like just a little bit more blown up, but still, you know, none of that depth on there. And then Like a Dragon Gaiden had the really weird trailer. Star Trek Infinite, Toxic Commando, a new Lord of the Rings game briefly teased and announced, which hopefully will do better than Gollum. That's something completely different. Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, Remnant 2, a couple others, but that's kind of the big ones. Nothing really huge. No Kojima, like he is known to appear with his best friend Jeff Keighley.
Well, that's because he was over doing the Apple event.
I know when he showed up the Apple event, the amount of like things that I saw blow up and people were like, "Oh my gosh!" And then it was like,
that was weird.
Death Stranding 2 is coming to Mac, or Death Stranding 1 is coming to Mac. Like, woo.
Well, but all of the Kojima games I think are coming to Mac.
Well, they're bringing a lot. It's Mac games, like, you know. People don't buy their Macs to play games.
That's true. That's true. But they get excited when they can play something, anything, you know? I used to be a Mac guy. I totally understand it.
You got anything to say about the other games at the Summer Games Fest or the games that I mentioned?
I'll just say.
I think
go ahead, Brian.
The 2-disc thing for Final Fantasy VII is really clever in terms of a callback to that era of games, right? Yep. When, you know, it was almost a calling card for how many discs that your game used, right? Like, oh man, that's a 4-disc game. It's huge, right? Like that was almost a feather in your cap in those days. Mm-hmm. So I thought this was clever.
Yeah, I think the multi-disc thing is interesting. I mean, I think it's cool for folks like you, Russ, that are collectors of old games and want to be able to put that disc into that console, and regardless of what the technology has done ever since, the game will boot and play, right? So, you know, things like I looked at The Division, which was completely online, and thought, okay, well, someday when that server goes offline, you won't be able to play this game anymore because there's no offline mode, you know, for better, for worse. I was really excited to see the Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown kind of return to a 2D style. I grew up playing the original Prince of Persia game, thought it was great. And then when they came out with the 3D stuff and it wasn't well reviewed, and then the movie was mediocre, you know, it was like, what are you doing with this whole franchise? But exciting to see it return to a 2-dimensional platform, and curious to see how it goes. The other thing I would say, and I didn't say this about Spider-Man 2 up there, was the gameplay looked amazing, and it looked like a fresh take on the classic gameplay that we experienced with Spider-Man 1 or the Spider-Man for PS4. So to see that kind of familiar but updated, I was excited to see that. So that coming out October is going to be great. So first off, I want to talk about this little interesting device that I got here. I'll show it on screen for anybody that's looking at the YouTube. This is the Asus ROG Ally, and it essentially is like the Steam Deck, but it is a Windows device. So unlike the Steam Deck that runs on a version of Linux, this baby can actually run full Windows, and then you can just launch into your Xbox launcher or your Ubisoft launcher or your Steam launcher, which I like because then you can have the same versions of the same games and your cloud saves come across. So far, really neat little device. I'm just kind of testing it out for a bit to see how I like it. Then we saw the updates about the Meta Quest 3 is coming out. I was intrigued to see that it's, lighter, better, faster. We'll see how it performs. And still, I think the question with all of that kind of stuff is ecosystem, which is where I think Apple has a leg up. The fact that Apple has chosen to get into the VR space with their Apple Vision Pro. To me, that legitimizes the whole VR space, but they're going to have developers that are developing just for Apple. The same way that when the first iPhones came out, I was sold on like BlackBerry and everything else. But then when I looked at how many apps there were on iPhones before the Androids ever came out, I was sold, you know? So it'll be interesting to see what happens there with the Apple Vision Pro coming in very, very expensive at $3,500. But if it can deliver and if it's a computer replacement, then maybe that price is justified, but maybe not for those of us that don't have $4,000 laying around, because guaranteed you're going to need some accessories, you know, like a carrying case or like a longer battery or things like that. So, yeah, I think those are most of the hardware things. We talked a little bit about the PlayStation hardware up there. Brian mentioned some of the Xbox hardware. What do you guys think about these upcoming hardware offerings from various companies?
So as a Steam Deck owner, I was very interested in the Asus ROG. I think the big difference in what people are kind of touting is the power. So what they were able to fit inside of the system for only $50 more than the equivalent Steam Deck is almost, I think they said, like, based on the tests that I've seen in videos and things, you're getting close to like 30 to 40% more power output, which is obviously great for PC gaming. And not to mention, then you also have the 120 hertz screen. So you've got a much nicer screen.
It's an OLED.
A more powerful device for only $50 more. What that tells me is the handheld market is heating up when it comes to these handheld PCs. For those that don't know this, and I follow a lot of YouTube channels that's all they do is review these kind of devices. There's a ton of them out there. I will say the Asus ROG and the Steam Deck are kind of your mainstream versions of those that have kind of got the most attention, but there are tons of them out there with different things under the hood, screens, powers, price points, all of that. It's becoming like a laptop, a version of a laptop that you can get out there. However, the reason why it's picking up steam is because the cost of these devices are going down. Before, they were about the cost of a gaming PC or a gaming laptop, and it was like, what's the point? Why would I buy that if I can just buy a laptop? Yes, it's a little more portability and a little bit more game focused because it has the controller attached. Great. But I've got a laptop that I can, Bluetooth a controller to. So unless you're going to save me money, it's not an important thing. And now with Asus and Steam Deck having kind of hit mainstream and become a more console level price, similar to like the Nintendo Switch, you're now getting people who are like, oh, so for just a little bit more than a Switch, I can get the power of a gaming PC in my hands, which I think they kind of saw the opening for that because of the success of the Switch. And so I love to see the competition opening up. That means prices are going to go down, power's going to go up, innovation's going to happen when it comes to handhelds. I was kind of hoping that Sony would see the success of Nintendo, Steam Deck, all that, and say, hey, we're jumping back in. I'm interested to find out more about the Q. What is it running on? Is it running on an OS? Like, how is it working? Like, to me, it has to run on an OS. It can't just be the PlayStation OS because, they don't have that built in to do that. I don't get that, to me. So I'm going to be very interested, at least follow it and follow that news. But very interested in the Asus ROG. We'll see. I may just keep my Steam Deck for now, because I'll be honest.
I do have to clarify. It's not an OLED panel. It just looks as good as it, almost looks as good as an OLED because it is 500 nits.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. I remember looking at it. I was about to say I didn't think it was OLED just yet, and that was some of people's complaints. And they're like, "Oh, Nintendo has an OLED screen.
It looks as good
better.
as the."
And I'm like,
Nintendo
yeah,
OLED.
but the Nintendo is running really old hardware and old specs. So don't come at me at this great OLED screen when the graphics are only so much. So one day we'll get one of these devices with an OLED as the OLED prices start to severely drop. But excited for that. Brian, I'll let you speak on the VRs because that's more of your realm. You definitely enjoy the VR headsets more than I do. So what are your thoughts on those?
I don't really have any. I think I might actually be the least VR person here, but no, I think it's intriguing. Like the Apple announcement, really, I thought was out of the blue. Especially in terms of price, I was not anticipating a $3,500 price point, even if we knew maybe they were working on some VR something, like to come out there was surprising. You know, also the kind of focus really wasn't on games, which is, you know, traditionally been the focus for VR devices. So that's an interesting angle of like, well, we're just going to go after folks that want to use this for, you know, whatever Mac, you know, apps that they want to use it for. And this sort of like, you know, multi-screen vision thing and some of the other things. So I thought that was intriguing. The other thing I wanted to comment too on was, you know, Project Q for Sony, that device. I do think there's a chance that could work if it's really, really cheap, right? Like if it was like in the realm of $100, I think it could actually work. I am concerned that like if it's closer to, you know, as you guys mentioned, as these devices, the Steam Deck and the ROG from Asus,